Okay, hello. I'm back. It's been a little while. I'll explain why it was a little while in a bit, but first I'm just going to get right into what the topic of this video is going to be. Um, I've been really, if you know me in real life, I've been like the biggest Michael Jackson fan since fucking forever. Since like I don't remember a time in my life, like in my conscious memory, that I did not love Michael Jackson. My earliest memories are from like 3 years old. Um, so that's a little bit of my credentials to speak on Michael Jackson shit, I guess. He's truly been and always will be my goat, right? Um, and for the first time in my life since his death, he's seen like a real major like resurgence in popularity. One that I would argue he didn't really see. Like, of course, anything that like has the Michael Jackson name, attached to it is going to be a hit. It's damn near guaranteed. Um, But this is the first time I think something has really like stuck in a monoculture way, and because I don't think the monoculture actually went anywhere. Sorry, I'm trying something with my hair. Hopefully that dried in a cool way. Um, so like the Michael Jackson movie came out, right, Michael, and I didn't have high expectations for it, to be honest. I'm a bit of a film person. I'm a filmmaker myself. I have very strong opinions on film and a high standard when it comes to the level of subject matter, the depth of the subject matter that we're dealing with here. I think that I anticipated that there would be a lot of compromises and it would be, the stereotypical biopic that walk hard, The Legend of Dewey Cox, already spoofed to death 2 decades ago. But fuck it, that's just how effective it is as a medium for some reason. And I find that like so interesting because I never left. I never left Michael Jackson like fandom ever. But I was never there. I was there at what I thought was a height around like, his death. And it certainly was. But I think since that time have I never again seen the monoculture of our society like put him back up top up there. It's only been like things lower than that time in my life. Because even like those last several years he was alive in the 2000s, I don't he was relevant but not for the right reasons. I don't think that in America anyway he was really respected as an artist and as a public figure. I think he was seen as sort of a circus show, freak show. It's really morbid. Reminds me a lot of what our society did to Britney Spears. It does this all the time, and especially it preys on women. In the entertainment industry. Certainly, it preys on men too. But I kind of think that the ways in which the system keeps down women entertainers or preys on their insecurities and vulnerabilities to have them, have the manufactured circumstances make them have some kind of mental breakdown, right? I think that's like a very systemic, like it's expressed bigotry, you know. It's bigotry made tangible in a systemic way that the victim has very little like agency over what happens to them in this regard. It's not respected, like whether or not they want that. And I think they're more likely to be targeted because strong artistic voices who are female are more threatening to a lot of status quos, at least, in terms of cultural influence. I'm not saying that any one artist, Michael Jackson or not, is single-handedly responsible for the direction that, for altering the course of human history, but obviously they and collectively artists do. And I think that when female stars use their experience to back up their vision and stand up for themselves independently, or try to be independent of like major labels and studios and production companies, what have you, not just music but anything. um, I think there are a lot of things in play in the form of, public discourse and control of it, that is weaponized, like especially against women, being that existential threat to the system itself if they're too exceptional. Happens to minorities all the time, and it happens to men mostly if there are minorities, but not exclusively. There's just levels to it. Like I said, it's expressed bigotry, like made tangible. So I think it's sensible to conclude that the degree to which the system is sort of stacked against a particular group, um, that it can marginalize them at will, in a sense, and utilize those powers against them. Um, and how often it feels the need to, right, existentially. And I think Michael Jackson certainly did pose that existential threat, and that's something that I enjoy seeing about his discourse being brought back into public light again, as people are interpreting him politically that were not engaged with him before, which is something that I've been, if you know me in my personal life, I've been begging for people to do. Anytime like this sort of topic comes up, which is more often than you might believe it would be, but I think Michael Jackson is one of a kind because of the level of existential threat he placed to the system. And I think a lot of that is not only in the fact that he was a black man, not only in the fact that he um, feminized himself to a certain degree, sought androgyny, which, spoiler alert, I think that Michael Jackson was probably non-binary if he had like a modern lens in which to view himself through, but he didn't. He was born in like the mid 20th century, bro. Like, it's hard to say for sure, like, but his brain just never even like had some of these ideas. It's like a wonder, like, had he lived long enough to be exposed to them, like what would we see? But anyway, no, not anyway. I think that that's directly correlated to why systems like ebb and flow in the degree to which they utilize him, and then the degree when he ceases to be useful, or rather starts to be seen as a liability for one reason or another. They cut him loose, and they're like, fuck Michael Jackson, he was a child molester, he like was a weirdo, blah blah blah. It becomes very like, I've seen it happen in ebbs and flows in my life, like small degrees of that, like momentum shifting societally. And by the way, let me just say, I think I think Michael Jackson was not right in the head. And I think that that allowed him to for whatever reason, give himself permission to have his close relationships to, like young boys as he did. I don't think, I personally believe that he did it. But I can also acknowledge, and shout out to Professor Sky, one of my favorite YouTubers, for really getting me to think about this concept lately of what the hell is, I don't remember what the actual term is, the didactic thinking or something, didactic. Um, but the idea that like you can hold two things to be true, and he will literally use Michael Jackson as an example because he does believe that Michael Jackson, was guilty of the crimes of which he was accused. But he's able to still say Michael Jackson is one of the greatest like artists in human history, or at least the last century. However, he actually rates him, I forget. And Michael Jackson, could be this like, could have done these like awful things and be this terrible person. But like one, if you actually try to reckon with the idea that one does not change the other, I'm realizing that that takes you to interesting places. And I'm not saying to be a centrist before. God, I get shit for that. Fuck it, I don't know. Um, but I have to express myself, like in these nuanced, perhaps, contradicting ways because I think that there's like more truth than that. Even truths that like would rather not be true. And I think it's worth it to recognize that for the betterment of the world around us, for the betterment of yourself, and for the betterment of the world around us. Um, I think like I tend to do like sort of psychological inventories on myself as best I can in previous stages of my life. I think it's kind of a marker of whenever I've entered a new stage in life every 5 years or so, um, that the person that I was the previous 5 years is gone, and my whole view of the world is different than what it was. Some things may have changed a little, but usually things change a lot. And that process of like constant like growth and self-discovery and never really like ceasing that curiosity despite how scary I think that people get scared of it, like it naturally happens to you as you grow up from childhood to adulthood. And I think that some point around like teenage years, middle school years, I think a lot of people stop engaging with like that growth because they're like so terrified of like the there's like an existential fear about like their change in worldview. So they have to like delude themselves into thinking like, oh, that's just a passing thought. My real truth is the same truth that I had since I was 3 years old, or whatever. And I think that when you can hold those views, you can have the sorts of politics and social ideas that Michael Jackson did. I think it is sort of an outward expression of non-binary itself as I discover it for myself, and I'm only speaking for myself on this. I, I I'm going through a journey that you're kind of seeing in these videos of discovering myself to be non-binary. And I don't know to what degree that is true. I don't think I see myself right now as transgender or anything, but I have come a long way. Like it's kind of shocking to me, like to think of the kind of person I was only a few years ago, what feels like only a few years ago, to someone who is willing to entertain this idea that I might be like an not like a cisgendered, person. I'm different, and like let me experiment with what that means for me, right? Like maybe one day I'll wake up and I'll say, you know what? I don't think I'm non binary. I think I'm a man. But fuck it, I like to wear makeup. Right? Like, there's no reason I can't express, like, myself the same no matter what. I think I kind of, myself right now, I think that the reason I feel non binary is because I think that I've come to view gender itself as arbitrary. I like to say that in the same way that, like, our society views a difference at all, a significant difference at all between, like, what kind of genitalia you have, is about as like logical as if our entire society was based around people that have like connected or disconnected earlobes. It's that much of like a luck of the draw, practically. And how absurd would that be, right? Like it's like the Sneetches, you know? Um, and for those who may not know, the Sneetches is like sort of a parable by Dr. Seuss. Again, you need didactic thinking to even give him any like thought, at all. But he wrote this story where there's these creatures, some of whom have stars, some of whom have like nothing, and essentially like they modify themselves and fight with each other socially to where like it switches around like, oh, who's cool, stars or no stars, stars or no stars. And in the end, right, like no either side was acting like it's like meant to be evident that no side was acting in a way that uh, was harmonious. Instead, right, which would just be to say that like whether or not you have stars or you're like the blank, you're just as good as each other. And, that's take for granted those kinds of sentiments, but it is kind of a wild idea, like a radical idea to think about. But I'm not even going to get into how this relates to like my views on Catholicism and stuff, like Christianity and its themes. But back to Michael Jackson. I think that Michael Jackson is like a representative of all of this sort of like identity. Everything about him is transitory in this like unbelievable way because at the time he was born, he's able to be like a 60s fucking Detroit blues, like soul singer on the one end, and then he's able to be an iteration, like his final stage is closer to like, 2000s or 2010s pop star. And we realize now like even 2020s pop stars are similar to like what his late era like was. Like the closer you get, you're only approaching him. You know what I mean? Nobody's done like whatever the next like step is, except I think Kurt Cobain had the potential to do that, and we sadly didn't really get to see that lived out. I always try to keep my shirts relevant. Okay, it might be a stretch, but hey, there's the connection's there. That's all I'm saying. Um, but no, like Michael Jackson, I think that is sort of his like danger, right? Is that the more you engage with him, the more you realize there's actually a lot to think about and chew on in what he created as an artist. I think a lot of people tend to write him up. I like to say like the Beatles similarly. I think that they're like so overrated, but it makes them actually like they're like such a mainstay, commonplace household name in like people's minds and in culture that people don't actually engage with the work on the level that it really like allows you to. I think Michael Jackson is one of those artists, just as much as like the Beatles were, where it's like these guys are genuinely the best fucking artists of all time. Just they are, like I don't know, like that's why they are what they are, and they live up to it. In my mind, I think Michael Jackson's whole discography is like this journey of self, if you think about it, right? And check this shit out. Each. Who else do you know, right? Okay, obviously, everybody and their mama is gonna have these three Michael records off the wall. Thriller, these of which, by the way, belong to my father. Um, Back in the day. And then this is my copy of Bad that I bought. It's a recent pressing. I used to not like it, but I've come to actually really enjoy that pressing. Everybody's got those, right? As far as like Michael Jackson's legacy and the estate during like times of like regular schmegular or like Michael Jackson economy, at least in my lifetime, that's all they want you to care about. The first three albums, that's where all the hits are from. Everything that you've ever heard on the radio is from those three. Those are the right, rightfully so. They are timeless, incredible masterpieces, on the level of things like Dark Side of the Moon and the White Album. They are that fucking good. Who do you know also has this one? Dangerous. I have Dangerous. Do you? Does your friend? Okay, but maybe you'll have Dangerous, okay? Because he was still sort of at his peak. Dangerous, he was still at his peak culturally. In fact, I would argue that was perhaps his highest peak culturally was like around the Dangerous era, like up to the release of Dangerous. And then the allegations hit in 93, and it derails his whole shit like unbelievably. You know? What's the response to that? How does Michael Jackson, whose work has, and mind you, right, I find it interesting on the album Dangerous, he gets his most like radical levels of personal goes into this album. Michael Jackson was a huge hip hop fan. He was a huge Tupac and Biggie fan. And I think that something, I would imagine something he loved about hip hop was the vividness with which it could like grab you and pull you into the story of a song and pull you into the perspective of the singer, right? In this case, I'll refer to the rapper as a singer because in a sense they are, right? Um, so this is where we get things like the Black Panther sketch that's attached to the black or white video, right? Which featured, by the way, people of all different cultures. That Michael Jackson, I think, popularized the humanist globalism or whatever that a lot of us like Gen Zers, millennials, zillennial, especially like kids grew up with in school. Michael Jackson made that cool, you know, and this time, right? Like that's when something comes in to fuck him up, right? At least in my view. Um, Not saying that I think I agree with Professor Sky that whatever Michael Jackson, even if he did the least of it, it's still not okay. That's what I should have said earlier. Um, but fuck it, you know. I mean, it's Kush Coffee conversation. Fuck it. We speak off the cuff. Um, it's not okay, but I don't think he. I think that's what I think he did the least of it. I think he did the least of it. You know. That's my personal research. I could be biased. I'm not, you know, not proclaiming my word as law. I'm just giving my take on it. Whatever. I mean, we have to reckon with it. We have to talk about it. You may disagree, and I completely respect that. And if I were to learn one day that it was all true, I would have to reckon with it. I wouldn't deny it. I would reckon with it. Maybe I'm in. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe I'm in denial. I don't think so, but maybe you know I'm just trying to express that like I'm open to m- changing like views over my life, right? Like kind of getting into the theme I was talking about. Every 5 years, I'm astounded by how different my worldview has become than like the person I was in the 5 years prior. And I think that Michael Jackson spaced out his releases album wise, like time wise, that like sort of aided his artistry to go along with a similar like journey in his life. And I think that given what happened to him post Dangerous, right, in a similar way to how like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is contextualized after Kanye West's peak and fall from grace through his actions at the VMAs, right? His peak with 808s and fall from grace subsequently, and how that becomes this like epic like tragedy, right? That's like the story that it tells. That, my friend, is what this album is. Who do you fucking know that has this fucking album? Leave it in the comments. Because I know there can't be many. So I'm genuinely curious, like how many people in the world could watch my video and see, like, genuinely. Genuinely now. This was a bit at first, but actually, if you own this record, please leave a comment, like, indicating so. And fuck it. Like, um, vinyl, CD, cassette, like, who owns this? This is, like, the real shit, in my opinion. You're, like, a real Michael Jackson fan if you know this. And and bump it. Um, because this is him going like peak Tupac, you know. I read an article on Yahoo News when I was like 11 or something, 10. And at that time they had this like strange, like the way they categorized their articles was they would go way back in time, like so like you could look from like whatever was current news from Michael Jackson at the time, and just like a few scrolls down, you'd see a news story from like 97. And this one I read from 97 was comparing Michael Jackson's lyrics on Stranger in Moscow, the second track of the actual, you know, album part of this, like new album part of this album, not the greatest hits part. Although maybe I'm committing sacrilege by not listening to it together. Shit. Maybe I should. Um, Um, but he's extremely confrontational, and I think that's the point where like he is very very like the level at which he like is so personal in his songs and intimate at that like stage in his career is like unreal. It's so compelling and powerful. It was compared. That's what I was trying to say. The Yahoo News thing. I found this article from '97 where this on Stranger in Moscow, the writer compared his lyrics on there to the subject matter of something like Kurt Cobain, who like they two were like neck and neck in the charts of probably in Europe or something, probably not America, but you know whatever. The idea being that they were like culturally like relevant and thematically similar, identical practically, and masterful, and like the works of living masters of a completely different like breed from each other. I'm very man. I wish I could have been like alive in Europe at that time in Michael's like late career because Europe and Asia, I believe, seems like he never really like stopped being seen as like a great artist. They have a respect for art in European culture more so than America, and they always saw him as an artist, even if perhaps they've been engaging with this didactic thinking for a long time. The Europeans are very very advanced people, at least in that regard. Advanced not necessarily meaning like progressive, like progressivism, or that it's like innately good or bad. I just think that they've been willing to go there, like philosophically, into weird places, and America is like very gun shy to do so. Um, but then that means the way that they reckon with Michael Jackson's art at this time is fascinating to me. To have that conversation, like Kurt Cobain versus Michael Jackson, and considering that Nevermind is the by all measures, if honestly, if the Jacksons hadn't used some kind of like understanding of their economic like hold on the industry to, they basically willed like Thriller back into the number one over like a long period of time. It's kind of nuts, you know. It's crazy, and Michael did that, at least once while he was alive with this, and or twice rather with the number ones too. But anyway, it's just wild to think of those times he was alive. Um, I recently told a young friend who's like a friend of my wife. So the reason I'm in this situation is because my wife is about 5 years younger than me, and then this friend is like another 5 years younger than her. Um, they're like talking to me about they've got like a fascination with 9/11, which happened before they were born, a few years before they were born, and they were asking me about it, and I was like getting to tell like an oral history to a new generation that they seemed like actually very interested in. And so I think it's worth it to talk about my experiences in life, period, because I a lot of things make up my perspective, and maybe it's like worthwhile like to discuss for other people who might have experienced similar things, or for people who just want to know what it was like to experience like different things. Um, so I'm trying to be like always honest and open, on this on these video logs, right? And now we get to this one. I also doubt many people that own this one, but I would believe this like way before I would believe history. I think at least like 5 to 10 times as many people own this record as own history records, especially in America. Now that album is one of my favorites, has always been one of my favorites for Michael Jackson, because I think it is his most ambitious sonically that he ever was, and at like a late stage in his career where he was now like getting used to his like third like major cultural shift. really, I guess only a second in his adult life, but he always handled cultural shift very well. So I think it's very interesting to see what he was like at this like later like mid stage of his life, which should have been middle aged. But now he knows towards the end of his life, unfortunately. Um, and like what was happening around him, like what was happening in society, what was happening culturally, and what could he do? What could he bring that was new to the table that made him Michael Jackson? I do believe, had this been pushed properly by Sony, it would have been a much bigger hit than it was. I don't know, and I've only like recently come to this viewpoint, but hey, I got because I used to put this on par with history, like not that long ago, 2 3 years ago I would have said it. Last year I would have said that. A few months ago I would have said that. I think that Invincible is fucking fascinating to listen to. I don't know if I could recommend it to the non Michael Jackson fanatic. I guess I'll say that much. And I think that he's trying to get back into being a persona to some extent, rather than like continuing to double down on his confrontational, like self-referential and self-identified like nature. Um, by the way, my hot take is that Michael Jackson actually had great album covers. I know it's cool to be like that. That to be like the caveat, like, oh, he's a great artist, man, but his covers were kind of simple. I don't know. They're interesting. He understood like what made something interesting to look at, like as a person, and then chose to express himself based on that, right? Which is why I think since a child, I've always been fascinated with the bad cover. And wait a damn second, what do we see here that's similar between me and Michael Jackson? Could it be the makeup? Not that I'm doing the same thing as him, but um, you're telling me I was supposed to idolize this guy, right? What this is a carefully constructed representation of, some place between masculinity and femininity. There's a degree of intentional femininity put into this to feminize Michael Jackson. They intentionally wanted to. I know this for sure because um, there is a really cool image of Michael Jackson in this like black veil covering his face. That was like a potential cover for the Bad album. I think it would have been fucking awesome, but the decision was made that it made Michael Jackson look too much like a woman. Then the implication you can come to from that is that this was an acceptable amount of how much he could look like a woman. I think that's fucking fascinating, right? That like even like my family and like older people, right? Like the time Michael Jackson was at his biggest was in the ultra conservative 80s, and a lot of his fans were lifelong ones. And so like even if you were a conservative person, you can love Michael Jackson and somehow like your brain like allows you to like see whatever he's doing to express himself and be okay with it. Despite like anyone else, me, doing the same thing and maybe it like rustles your feathers. It's kind of inconsistent, but I think that's like fascinating, you know? Um Unfortunate for me, but I guess I'm trying to say, like, from a young age, I think that I took influence from Michael Jackson in my expression of self, and I'm becoming like a new version of myself. Like now that I'm living back here at home, and I'm not even in LA anymore, in a cool place. I'm somewhere where it's like risky to be this. To be going on this like journey, and my wife likes it. My wife likes it, and I've gotten complimented more often on my appearance at this stage in my life than I ever have, and I felt more comfortable and had like when I look like this, I have experiences with people that feel very like true because I think it makes them like treat me a certain way, you know, and I think it's really powerful. And somehow Michael Jackson got away with doing that to the entire world in the like mid 20th century. Crazy, you know. Prince too. A lot of people. Rick James, David Bowie, James Brown, Little Richard. A lot of people have done this. So what's like wrong with me doing it? You know, what's wrong with anybody doing it? Why does it matter? It's all fucking made up. You know. Not only, oh, by the way, not only do I have every Michael Jackson solo studio album post off the wall, but I also have this one, Destiny, one of my favorite Jackson albums from post Motown days, pre Off the Wall. But I also have post Off the Wall in Triumph. Sorry, phone, laptop was about to die. Triumph, lots of great songs on there. Sounds like a choir's really in the room sometimes. And I also have this one, The Jacksons' Victory, which I think is actually my favorite Jacksons album because, again, Michael Jackson was kind of in his early stages, we know now, as that's like right before Thriller, right after Thriller, I'm pretty sure. So it's kind of like insane that that they still had to be a part of that. He hadn't just but that's pretty much the end of the Jacksons. So it's like the finality of like his brothers as artists, which I think, deserve a lot of respect in their own rights for what they brought to the table. What am I on time wise? I'm not doing too bad. And pretty much all of their career takes place in the 70s. And once you get into the 80s, I think and as the sound changes, which Thriller helps to propel that change itself, and you really get to like that mid 80s sound with like a lot of the like drum machines and stuff in lieu of real drums, and the sort of echoey, my friend calls it a wet basement feel, that the 80s had. How did this like 70s super group of like young prodigies, how did they deal with that late stage career, late stage artistry? Can you make like this new sound work? Can you evolve? And I think to a large extent they really did, because that album is fucking cool, dude. The other ones might be better on like a technical level, songwriting level, but I just think it's interesting to see them like play around there. Needless to say, I have my credentials. I'm a real fucking fan, bro. Um, but yeah, I guess I had ideas of something to talk about when it comes to like the monoculture that Michael Jackson sort of created and existed in, and how again I think that Kurt Cobain was going to be the real inheritor of that had he continued to live. Um, I think that it hurts us that we don't have someone doing that anymore. I think the closest thing to someone trying is Kendrick Lamar, but we'll have to see over time how he continues to be that person, if he can keep it up. Because it's no easy feat, man, to achieve Michael Jackson like levels of influence. And I think that he's the closest we've had in that, in the last few years to doing that than a lot of other people, certainly since like Kanye in a long fucking time. I feel like Kanye used to be like that in 808's era through to Yeezus. Maybe you could say Life of Pablo. Life of Pablo is my favorite Kanye album, by the way. If you see a pattern in what I like, what I like my artists to do, I like them to get extreme in their like individualized expression. I find that like so fucking cool. Um, and I think they do such interesting work there. So I guess my main point is go buy a vinyl of History, not the picture disc, and don't play it on a fucking Crosley or something like a suitcase thing that they have nowadays. Maybe a vintage suitcase could be cool. I really don't know. But modern suitcase ones, don't buy them. They damage your records and they sound like shit. Invest in a halfway decent like setup, bro. It's worth it. Like, it's worth it if you're gonna engage in the hobby. Like, you have to invest in it. Um, I say like record collecting is probably the hobby that I think you really get like the most per dollar that you put into it, like back in the experience, like in heightening that experience. Um, so I think in the same way, like you might feel compelled to like have every Beatles record or something, like you should, or every Kanye record. You should want to have every Michael Jackson record. Each one is life changing in a different way, Um, and I guess I'm happy to see, to wrap this back around to the beginning, I'm happy to see culture engaging with him in ways that they did not before. Ways in his like later career that even like immediately post death barely was like the topic of conversation as much as his nostalgia. But now everybody's like so used to the nostalgia like that has been sold of his legacy that they're starting to themselves find like what else was there, which isn't a whole lot. It's basically just another like half. It's another like 4 albums. Three. It's another 3 albums. So it's like easy to engage with and form like opinions and see through a new lens and like, oh, that actually makes me feel nostalgic for the 90s and this makes me feel nostalgic for the 2000s and that's cool now. So of course like people are kind of like latching on to stuff that I never seen them latch onto before, and I fucking love that. Cuz great artists, there's infinite ways to like interpret their work. And it all comes, your interpretation of art comes from your perspective as a person. So new perspectives means new interpretations, which means like we're all sort of like redefining what any like work of art can be as like time goes on. Um, and it's really cool that the Michael movie allowed that to happen again. Um, I think whatever else you may think of Michael Jackson didactically, the things that I've talked about in this video, I've tried to speak on things that are true, that just are. And that's just what I tried to do. I try to like be fair. Um, I don't think you can deny like influence. You can't fake it. He's got that influence, man. He just does. So I think it's worth engaging with it and engaging like what that did to our history and what we can learn from it, like artistically. Do I mean that? Maybe I don't, because I'm speaking from a place that I don't think he did it. But shit, if the Epstein files released tomorrow and there actually is something in there that is like, yeah, Michael Jackson definitely did this. Fuck, like I'd never listen to him again. I don't think I'd burn my records. I'd never stream him again for sure, and I'd keep the records in case I ever did like need to listen to something. At least like no profit would be made. Like there'd be no support towards all that. Um, Again, that's one of the importances of physical like collection, especially secondhand selling. Anything you do economically, if it can be secondhand, that's great. Um, because then you get to just express, and you can worry less about how your consumption of a thing reverberates like negatively on society. That's why I never stream Kanye. I also don't listen to his records anymore, but I still haven't thrown them. I have several of his too. Because as I said in prior video, I had to break free. I'm an ex-evangelical, as I like to say. Broke free from the cult. Yep. But that's neither here nor there. I perhaps also, am skeptical of my belonging to some similar case for Michael Jackson or Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain, I have a very like balanced view of it. I know that I'm susceptible to idolize him as a person, but he was just a person, and he was kind of an asshole. And like I can allow that to be true, but I don't think he personally like did anything so detestable that I can't engage with his art. So I think he was a great artist. I think he was a troubled person. I don't think I idolize him, but find his art to be like endlessly valuable, Kurt Cobain. And I think that would have to become my view of Michael Jackson, ideally, at worst. But no, at worst it would be like closer to the Kanye thing, where I would have to second guess everything, man. I don't know. But that's the perspective I'm speaking from. You know. Okay, I guess that's about it. I don't know what I'll call this video. I'll think of a name, but thanks for watching. If you like this, like, comment, and subscribe. No, I don't know. I always say I don't do these to get, like, attention. I don't really need these to blow up or anything. If just a few people, like, if anyone, even one person views any of them, like, that's cool. Get something out of them, that's cool. But I want to continue doing things just to do them, not to play some kind of game, not to play the meta of stuff so much. But, and despite that, I made a Michael Jackson video in the wake of the Michael movie. I was affected by it. What do you want me to say? It's on my mind too. I can't talk about what's on my mind just because it's on everyone else's mind. Nah. Anyway, take care.